Hello, and welcome to Critical Thinking in COVID-19, Episode 7, The Argument Against Expertise. In a previous episode, we went over the argument from authority, and a standard used to distinguish between credible and non-credible experts, and also experts and non-experts. While people do often make the mistake of treating non-experts as credible sources, they also make the mistake of rejecting credible experts because the experts are experts. This sort of fallacious reasoning is worthy of a name, and the obvious choice is argument against expertise, or argument against authority. It occurs when a person rejects a claim because it was made by an authority or expert, and it has the following form. Premise 1. An authority or expert A makes claim C. Conclusion. Therefore, claim C is false. All experts can obviously be wrong. They make mistakes. They get things incorrect. To infer that an expert is wrong because they are an expert is obviously absurd and an error in reasoning. To use a geometry example, to get away from my usual silly math examples, I'll do a silly geometry example, which is technically also math, but anyways. So premise 1. Euclid, an expert on geometry, claimed that triangles have 3 sides. Conclusion, triangles do not have 3 sides. Now clearly that would be crazy, yet people do engage in this kind of bad reasoning. Now it must be noted there are rational grounds for doubting an expert, as discussed in our episode on the argument from authority. When a person rationally applies these standards of assessing an alleged expert and decides, based on good reasons, that an expert lacks credibility, that would not be a mistake. That would be reasonable. But to reject a claim only because the source is, an expert, or simply to reject a claim just because of the source, regardless of whether it's an expert or not, would always be a fallacy. Typically an ad hominem of some sort, like the person claims this, here's something about them that's disliked, therefore they're wrong. So a source by itself never disproves a claim. Also never proves a claim conclusively, but never disproves it conclusively. So rejecting a claim because it was made by an expert would seem to be the double fallacy, if there is such a thing. Because rejecting a claim simply because of the source, fallacy. Rejecting a claim because it comes from an expert would seem to be, doubly bad. Now, since experts are more likely to be right than wrong, this sort of reasoning will tend to lead to accepting untrue claims. Again, not guaranteed. A person can engage in a fallacy, and again, it's just bad logic. It doesn't mean their claim is false. It just means logic is bad. Now, while it's bad in normal times, if there ever is such a thing, to reject, claims by experts, it's even more dangerous during a pandemic, for obvious reasons. In the case of COVID-19, there are those who use this sort of bad reasoning to reject the claim of medical experts. This can obviously lead to illness and death. Now, I'm not claiming that people explicitly come out and say, premise 1. This expert makes the claim about social distancing, but I reject experts. Therefore, the claim is false. People generally don't talk like that, except obviously philosophers. What happens is people will simply reject claims and they'll make some remark about the person being like an egghead or an intellectual and then reject it. And what they're doing is, this argument against authority. Their bad reasoning is, I'm rejecting this claim because they're an expert. Therefore, I'm right and they're wrong. Now, since the fallacy lacks all logical force, as all fallacies, do lack this, it must derive its influence from something else. Typically, it would be psychological factors. And these are worth considering when trying to defend against and respond to this dangerous fallacy. Our first step in understanding the driving forces behind this fallacy take us back to ancient Athens to visit our good dead friend Socrates. One of Socrates' friends went to the oracle of Delphi and asked the oracle, who, great oracle, is the wisest of men? It was, of course, Socrates. His friend comes back and says, hey, Soc, guess what? Soc says, what? And so his friend says, who's the wisest of men, Soc? And Soc's like, I don't know. And his friend says, you, Socrates, you are the wisest of men. Soc's like, oh, okay. Now, most people would accept this praise, that they're being called the wisest, that they have the best brain. Socrates believed the gods were wrong and set out to disprove them. And the way to do this, of course, was to find someone wiser. Just like if someone said you were the fastest runner, and for some reason you wanted to disprove them, you'd race against people to find someone who could beat you. So he questions the poets, the politicians, the craftspeople, anyone who would speak with him. And he found that everyone believed they knew far more than they did. And the more ignorant the person, the more they believed they knew. Reflecting on this, Socrates concluded that the gods were right. He was the wisest of all because he knew that he knew nothing. That is, infinite ignorance eclipsed what little he knew. While some were grateful to Socrates for having their ignorance revealed, most, as you might expect, were outraged and saw to it that he was put on trial and sentenced to death. Oh, sorry, spoilers. While we now have smartphones, people really haven't changed from those times. Most people believe they know far more than they do, and they resent anyone who would disagree. And resent most of all someone who reveals their ignorance. And referring to smartphones, technology has made this worse, thanks to, as some call it, the University of Google and social media. People not only doubt experts, but regard themselves as equal or better than these experts because they looked it up on Google. Now, the fundamental lesson of philosophy, Socrates' realization that wisdom lies in knowing that you know nothing, provides a defense against this arrogant ignorance. How so? Well, again, if a person realizes or knows they know nothing, they're less likely to engage in the arrogant belief that they know everything better than everyone else. Now, this is not to embrace empty skepticism and just say, oh, I don't know anything, I don't know that, I don't know this, I don't know anything at all, in which one doubts just everything for no good reason, but to accept a healthy skepticism about the extent of our own knowledge and develop a willingness to listen to those who might and hopefully do have knowledge. We can continue our philosophical adventure centuries past the death of Socrates by visiting our good dead friend John Locke. While Locke is best known for life, liberty, and property, not pursuit of happiness, that's the founders, because as my political science professor said, they had all the property, didn't want people getting ideas. He also wrote a bit on enthusiasm. Now, by enthusiasm, he didn't mean being really stoked about your sports team or for getting some free, guacamole for your burrito. He was concerned with the tendency people have to believe a claim that they strongly feel to be true. Well, Locke was very concerned with this in the context of religion, and he was also very concerned about the devil leading people to believe false things. He held to a very sensible general principle, extending far beyond religion, that one should believe in proportion to the evidence, rather than in proportion to the strength of the feeling. And Locke was arguing as a devout Christian. Again, his worry was about people embracing things because they just felt like they were right. And he was worried that the devil would be deceiving people. And also, of course, concerned about rational assessment of beliefs in the context of epistemology. Now, while psychologists and cognitive scientists have examined the various cognitive biases that contribute to what Locke calls enthusiasm, his basic idea is correct. Believing on the basis of strong feelings is not a rational way to form beliefs. True beliefs can be backed up with evidence and reason. The power of enthusiasm leads people to believe based on the strength of their feelings, and they will often be wrong, thus leading them to reject what experts claim when there's disagreement between their feelings and the claims of expertise. They will feel that they are right, and that their strong feeling counts more than expertise, but there is no foundation for this. Now, the defense against this is not, obviously, to become cold and unfeeling. Rather, it is to be aware that feelings are not evidence, and to endeavor to proportion belief to the evidence and not to the feelings. This is very difficult to do. It's hard to fight feelings one has that, feeling that a claim is just wrong without any evidence, or feeling that a claim is just right without evidence. But rational decision making that can save your life and the lives of others requires this. In normal times, if there is such a thing, and especially now. How we feel about COVID, how we feel about social distancing, or how we feel about alleged cures proves nothing about them. It only proves things. The above applies universally to everyone, but what about us Americans in particular? Unfortunately, we're especially prone to rejecting experts because they are experts. This tendency feeds into stereotypes that often appear in fiction, and these stereotypes then feed the tendency. For example, the idea that intellectuals, especially professors like myself, are helpless outside of the ivory towers, and that problems are solved by manly men with loud voices and a strong right hook, is a common theme. The defense against this is to realize that the stereotypes are just that, stereotypes. Sure, they're intellectuals who are bad at doing stuff. There are professors that, have a hard time functioning outside the classroom. That's true. But like all stereotypes, they're not universally true. And even if the stereotypes about professors, intellectuals being helpless outside the ivory towers, etc., were true, that doesn't make their claims false. That would just be an ad hominem. Now, a mistaken conception of American democracy also serves to fuel this fallacy. While American political philosophy does hold that everyone is equal and everyone has a right to free expression, these are wrongly interpreted as everyone being equal in knowledge and that all opinions are equally good. Although, of course, my opinion is first among equals. The science fiction writer Isaac Asimov, the robot guy, the three laws, etc., noted this. He said, to quote him, "There is a cult of ignorance in the United States, and there always has been. The strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread, winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge. This view is also fed by relativism, the idea there is no objective truth, that there are just alternative facts." Now, the defense against this misinterpretation of democracy and freedom of expression is obviously not to reject democracy. It's not a problem with democracy or freedom of expression. It's a problem of thinking that democracy and freedom of expression means that ignorance equals knowledge, just because someone has the right to, vote and express themselves. Now, we can and should accept democracy and freedom of expression, but we also need to realize that neither of these entail that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge. We can accept democracy and accept that people have the right to express themselves, but the correctness of a claim is not a matter for a vote, nor is any opinion automatically as good as any other, just because someone is free to express it. Almost everyone realizes this when it comes to practical matters. While sometimes people do try to do their own dentistry, build their own, rockets, or rewire their houses on their own without knowing what they're doing, most people realize that root canals, major electrical work, and rockets are best left to the experts. we turn to dentists, mechanics, electricians, and engineers in such situations because they're experts, and we're generally not. We should get the same applies to areas, beyond just this purely practical stuff about electrical work and root canals, applying to areas such as epidemiology and, health matters. This is not to say that we should blindly believe the experts, but that we should accept claims made by credible experts over our own ignorance. Also, of course, we shouldn't accept authoritarians over authorities. While the professed political values of America are contrary to authoritarianism, a significant percentage of Americans have embraced it. As noted in an earlier video, authoritarian leaders and followers are generally inimical to real experts, and their delusions and lies can motivate them to accept this fallacy. While rejection of experts is not limited to the right, see, for example, the anti-vaccination movement, and of course see historical examples like in the former Soviet Union, Cambodia, etc., the American right has systematically waged a war on experts whose views conflict with their ideological claims and what they regard as key economic interest. While the right did not, perhaps, intend to wage a war on all expertise, it has had this effect. Distrust in experts has grown considerably and often with very negative consequences. This is not to say that experts are blameless. There have also been clear failings among experts and those purporting to be experts. But the lessons of these failures have generally not been properly interpreted. For example, historically, it's often claimed that the failures in the Vietnam War were due to arrogant experts. Well, this has some merit. The true lesson of the book, The Best and the Brightest, seems to have been that ignoring credible experts was a major factor behind the poor decision-making. So it wasn't that following credible experts is the problem, it's that ignoring credible experts in favor of people who are not credible experts but are presenting themselves as such is the problem. Since rejecting experts has become a matter of political identity for some Americans, overcoming this aspect will be extremely difficult. Also, overcoming decades of systematic undermining of expertise and science will also be extremely difficult. Neither is impossible, but it might be more realistic to focus on outvoting those who reject reason in favor of ideology in order to get those in office, regardless of political party, who favor making rational decisions based on actual facts and evidence. This is not to say that would be a perfect system, not making that claim, but making decisions based on actual expertise generally leads to better results. There's also some hope that this terrible pandemic will be enough to shake some people out of their ideology, that they'll realize that expertise is essential, that one cannot delude or lie their way out of a pandemic, that one can only get out of it through actual expertise, science, and medicine. That they will realize that rejecting medical experts and going with their own beliefs is like trying to do their own surgery on themselves. But we shall see how this turns out. But stay safe, and I will see you in the future.